Hi everyone, this is the third and final video on the King's Indian defence, and after having two good wins for black, it seems only fair to have a win for the white pieces and show some of the dangers associated with playing the defence for black. We're going to look at Salomon Floor against Alexei Suetin, which took place in the USSR Championships in Moscow in 1950. The game began knight f3, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4. Move order is slightly different here, but it's not so important with the King's Indian compared to other openings. d6, d4, castles, bishop e2, e5, and we've transposed to the same position as before. White castled, knight and b to d7 and d5. And you'll notice the knight moves to d7 here instead of c6, which has a couple of ideas in mind. After d5 he can go to c5, which pressurizes this pawn, and after the queen moves to protect it he can play a5, which establishes the knight at c4. If b4 is played, then the pawn can just take, and if white plays a3 threatening b4, then a4, and if b4 is played, the pawn can take en passant and the knight will be at an outpost. So knight e1, knight fd7, bishop e3, f5, and we're going to look at a different variation here compared to the last game, which is e takes f5. It's a different kind of game compared to the last one we looked at. It generally becomes quieter and more positional after g takes f5, which is the best move really. Sometimes black can take back with a piece here, but this gives control of e4 to white for his pieces, and that can be strong. Like sometimes, say for example in the last variation, the knight would have been on d7 and then the knight could take back here and move to d6 or d4, sorry, which could be strong, although it's creating some danger for the king, because say if the bishop takes and these pieces are going to rain down. But anyway, the game continued. E takes f5, g takes f5, f4, which is the usual follow-up for white. He's preventing any further advance of black's f-pawn and forcing black to make a decision about how to resolve the pawn tension in the center. Black basically has three main options. He can push with the pawn to e4 here, exchange on f4, or maintain the tension, although that's not possible to him here, and that's often the case actually. So e4, which was a mistake really. There's no solid rules about how black should handle these structures, but a few general rules exist. Like the advance to e4 gives black a passed e-pawn, but it's securely blockaded in this game, and that's generally the case, and it doesn't represent a significant threat. Worse for black is the fact that the advance e4 gives white the use of d4 for his pieces, and white can prepare g4, which undermines the support of e4 and can just create problems for black. So you just have to play that move carefully. It's okay to play e4 if say again if the knight was here and black would play c5, and even if d takes c5, b takes c5 and then c5 again, and black would be controlling this square, and then e4 is okay, but in this situation it's really not a good move. Better would have been, instead of e4, e takes f4, bishop takes f4, and although black has some structural weaknesses, he can compensate it with piece play after, say for example, this variation. Sorry, no, not that variation, this variation. The variation before there was one possibility, like black could play knight e4 and white can't recapture twice, because after the queen takes, the b pawn's hanging. So anyway, the game continued. Queen d2, knight f6, knight c2, queen e8 and knight b5, which is a good move because the knight is tying black to the defense of c7, because the fork is threatened on the queen and the rook, and also it can't be dislodged later in the game after c7's defended. Like say for example that the knight can't be dislodged with c6, because then the knight can take d6. So black played here another bad move, queen f7, to defend the c pawn, but queen e7 would have been better here, like say queen e7, because then bishop d4 can be countered with c6. But after black played queen f7, then bishop d4 is played for free. So the game continued, knight e8, knight e3, king h8 and rook ac1. And with this move white's intending to play a rook lift like so, and just create more threats on the black king. So then came bishop d7, rook c3, rook d8, king h1, knight a6, knight c2, bishop takes d4, knight on b takes d4, and knight f6, which is really a blunder and loses a pawn. Knight g7 would have been better, although white's still in good control. So knight f6, rook g3, and this pawn's hanging from the queen, but black really has to take care of the threats from the rook. Like say for example if you played b6 instead, then knight e3, knight e8 and knight d takes f5 is very strong. After bishop takes f5, queen d4 check, queen f6 is really the only move, because after knight g7 and knight takes f5 is winning a lot of material. And after queen f6 then knight takes f5 can be played, which is also strong for white. So he has to play really rook g8. After rook takes g8 check, rook takes g8, knight e3, queen g7, g3, queen g6, queen takes a5, h5 and knight g2. And this move designed to prevent counterplay with h4. Then continued after knight g2, knight g4, queen c3, king h7 and b4, which is another strong move. White's preparing to break through on the c-file by playing c5, and you swing his rook over here in a second. So after knight b8, a3, queen f7, bishop takes g4, h takes g4, knight e3, queen g7, rook c1, king g6, c5, and d takes c5, which of course is preferable to something like rook h8, c takes d6, c takes d6, and white has absolute domination with control of the c-file, and this pawn will be falling soon. So then came b takes c5, bishop c8, knight c4, and white's pieces is just gradually penetrating into the black position. The white king is completely safe, and it's not looking good for black. Rook d8, d6, c takes d6, c takes d6, king h7, queen a5, queen d7, knight e5, a great outpost square that also comes with tempo because the queen has to move. And after queen takes d6, knight f7, white's getting all the tactical threats, and this is the kind of decisive queenside breakthrough that can happen when you play the King's Indian defense if you're not careful. White is just completely dominating the position. Black tried b6, but after queen a7, queen d7, queen takes b6, it's really not looking good. White has a crushing advantage here, and it's the kind of thing that can happen in the King's Indian. You know, things can go badly wrong if you're not careful. So watch out for this kind of situation. Queen takes d4, queen takes d8, queen takes d8, knight takes d8, and the rest really is a matter of technique. White's the exchange up as well as a pawn, and although the e-pawn is passed, it's easily stopped. I'll play out the rest of the game just in case you're curious to see how it goes. e3, king g1, king h8, knight c5, and black resigned because it's all over here. So those are some of the dangers associated with the King's Indian defense, and that concludes the series on that particular opening. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.